Is there anything that you would like to say, sir?
Nothing.
Over there at the house on Sunday afternoon to meet with you.
20 miles away at a barbecue.
Now, Hall and two other men are charged with killing David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell in Pittsfield in August of 2011. Hall did not take the stand in the nearly 4-week-long trial.
With that, we know he's responsible for it, but the people who know what happened in there are the person who was killed.
Over there at the house on Sunday afternoon to meet with you.
20 miles away at a barbecue.
Now, Hall and two other men are charged with killing David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell in Pittsfield in August of 2011. Hall did not take the stand in the nearly 4-week-long trial.
Adam Lee Hall from Peru, Massachusetts was part of a biker gang called the HELLS Angels. It all started when Hall thought David Glasser would snitch on him about many crimes. Hall didn't like that one bit, so he and some of his companions devised a plan to shut Glasser up for good. On August 28, 2011, they went after Glasser. But here's the thing, they didn't just get him. They also killed two of his friends, Edward Frampton and Robert Chadwell. These guys were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. The cops found the bodies about 2 weeks later, buried in a trench. It was pretty grim stuff. Now, the trial was a big deal. It happened in Hampton Superior Court in Springfield. The judge was a guy named C. Jeffrey Kinder. He had to deal with a lot of crazy stuff during this trial. Berkshire District Attorney David Capeless was the prosecutor. He had a tough job, but was determined to get justice for the victims.
20 miles away at a barbecue.
The colleague will say no more during the remainder of the closing argument. You may proceed, Mr. Case.
And most importantly, those records and analysis of them and the test drive together also corroborate that the defendant was at the scene of the burial on Monday.
During the trial, they brought in all sorts of evidence. Some witnesses said they saw Hall and his mates planning the whole thing. They even had some physical evidence linking Hall to the murders.
You say the defendant is guilty of murder in the first degree. So say you had a murder. So say you are, ladies and gentlemen. Yes. By reason of one, deliberate premeditation. So say you had authority. Yes. So say you are, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Yes. And two, extreme atrocity or cruelty. So say you had authority. Yes. So say you are, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Yes. Was that in 2011? Yes.
Hall tried to say he wasn't there when it happened, but the jury wasn't buying it. After a lengthy trial, they found him guilty of pretty much everything. 3 counts of murder, kidnapping, witness intimidation, you name it.
For the term of life, without the possibility of parole.
Adam Lee Hall stood emotionless as that sentence was read out loud 3 times, one for each of the 3 men Hall was convicted of killing: David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell.
In August 2014, Judge Kinder laid down the law. He gave Hall 3 consecutive life sentences without parole. That means Hall's going to be behind bars for the rest of his life.
Is there anything that you would like to say, sir?
Nothing.
A 5-year full sentence, all of which is to be served at the ACI.
In June 2021, Joseph Lancia, the president of the Rhode Island chapter of the HELLS Angels, began serving a 5-year sentence. Lancia, 30, faced severe charges after a violent incident in June 2019. He pleaded no contest to felony assault and carrying a gun without a license. The more severe charges, such as discharging a firearm during a violent crime, were dropped as part of an appeal deal.
After reaching a deal with prosecutors, 30-year-old Joseph Lancia of Smithfield pleaded no contest to felony assault and battery charges and carrying a gun without a license. The more serious charges of discharging a firearm when committing a crime of violence and assault with intent to commit murder, they were dismissed as part of the deal. Lancia was sentenced to serve 5 years in prison. Our Tim White was at today's hearing and will have a full report coming up.
28-year-old Joseph Lancia is facing new charges after an altercation at the Cadillac Lounge in Providence last night. Officers on detail at the club say they saw Lancia punch a man in the face, knocking him unconscious. That man did go to the hospital to get checked for any head injuries. Lancia is being held until his arraignment, which is expected tomorrow. He is already charged with assault with intent to murder after he fired a gun at a passing truck last.
The case began when Lancia fired a gun at a truck driven by Richard Starnino, a former prospect for the HELLS Angels. Police reported that Lancia shot at Starnino as he went by the HELLS Angels headquarters in Providence.
A video from the scene that night back on June 6th of what appeared to be a violent attack. According to police, 3 young men got into an argument with several bikers outside of a bar near Newport Avenue and Bacon. One man was stabbed in the chest, another was knocked out. Now, that night, police arrested one suspect. There was an investigation, and since then, the case ended up in the hands of a grand jury. In the end, it charged 17 people. A news conference just got started upstairs on the 13th floor of the Hall of Justice. We'll be hearing from the DA's office, as well as nearly a dozen other members of law enforcement, including the ATF, the San Diego Sheriff's Department, as well as San Diego Police, and several other police departments from this area, from Oceanside to Escondido, National City to Chula Vista. So this certainly appears to be a widespread investigation.
This incident stemmed from an ongoing dispute between the two men. The shooting was captured on the clubhouse's security cameras, which became vital evidence against Lancia. Judge Kristen Rogers presided over the case, and during the sentencing, she asked Lancia if he had anything to say. He simply replied, nothing. The courtroom was filled with HELLS Angels members who supported Lancia while he was handcuffed.
At his arraignment, prosecutors say the state police have video of the shooting. Now, the incident led to a massive raid on the HELLS Angels Motorcycle Club on Messer Street in Providence yesterday afternoon. State police say they seized multiple firearms and ammunition from the clubhouse. It's unclear if any of those weapons.
Attorney General Peter Narona emphasized the seriousness of gang-related violence, stating that Lancia represented a significant threat to public safety. He noted that cases involving organized crime like this one are a priority for his office. Prosecutors Jim Baum and Joseph McBurney handled the case, presenting a solid argument for a harsh sentence due to the violent nature of Lancia's actions. As part of his sentence, Lancia will be on probation for 10 years after release. Additionally, the judge issued a no-contact order to protect Starnino for 8 years.
We know he's responsible for it, but the people who know what happened in there are the person who was killed.
It was July 14th, 2013, in Omaha, Nebraska. Jay Witt, a 48-year-old member of the HELLS Angels, was at the club's hangout. Things got heated between him and another member, William Furlong. These two had been butting heads for a while, and it all blew up on this night. The argument got out of hand fast. Before anyone could stop it, Witt pulled out a gun and shot Furlong right there in the clubhouse. Furlong didn't make it. Witt was in deep trouble just like that.
Clubhouse near 27th and J in July 2013, but only the convicted came out. Witt was initially charged with second-degree murder and claims it was self-defense. Just before trial, he pleaded no contest to manslaughter, though he said he was defending himself.
After the shooting, Witt took off. He managed to stay under the radar for about a month. The cops were on his tail, though, and they finally caught up with him on August 16, 2013. They found him hiding out in a house in Omaha's Benson neighborhood. When Witt was hauled into court, he faced some serious charges. It was an apparent first-degree murder and use of a weapon to commit. Those are the kinds of charges that can put you away for life.
Issues that that were needed to be resolved, and we thought it'd be we would assure ourselves of a conviction with the manslaughter rather than a trial where there's issues.
The prosecutor on the case was John Allagaban from the Douglas County Attorney's Office. He proved to the jury that Witt was guilty as charged. District Judge Lee Ann Rittelsdorf kept the trial fair and on track.
70s by the time he's even eligible for parole, so we think that's an appropriate sentence.
Prosecutors say 48-year-old Jay Witt will serve a mandatory 22 and...
As the trial continued, we learned more about why Witt and Furlong were at each other's throats. They'd been rivaling for a while, and it all came to a head that night at the clubhouse. In the end, Witt decided to cut a deal. He pleaded no contest to second-degree murder and use of a weapon to commit. This plea deal helped him avoid a possible life sentence, but he was still in for some serious time.
Witt also pleaded guilty to felony use of a weapon and felon in possession. Now, the judge said that his extensive criminal history of assault, theft, and drug charges also played a role in the sentence. Reporting live outside the Douglas County Courthouse in downtown Omaha, Jake Wasikowski, KMTV Action 3 News.
When the sentencing day came around in February 2015, Judge Rettelsdorf didn't pull any punches. She slapped Witt with 30 years for the murder charge and another 20 years for the weapon charge. And get this, she made these sentences run back to back, so Witt's looking at a total of 50 years behind bars.
That case went to the jury on Friday after closing arguments. Vayovis is the third and final defendant to be tried in the 2011 killings of David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell. The two other men charged in this case were both convicted of first-degree murder and are serving life sentences in prison.
A Hampton Superior Court jury found 34-year-old Caius Vayovis guilty on 3 counts each of kidnapping, witness intimidation, and first-degree murder. He was sentenced to lifetime imprisonment.
When I was first arrested, the police made it clear to me that they did not actually believe I was anything to do with the disappearance and murder of these men, but that they did believe I possessed some knowledge that would greatly assist in their investigation. The threats and the promises were instantaneous, and it was their expressed intent to squeeze on me. I've been in isolation for 3 years now. I've refused to talk to the cops. I've turned down all numerous plea deals offered me from the beginning. Just 1 month before this trial began, DA Capos called my attorney, Gavin Reardon, and told him he knew I did not kill people.
Vayovis of Pittsfield had pleaded not guilty to the charges connected to the murders of David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell. The men disappeared from a Pittsfield apartment in August 2011. Their dismembered bodies were discovered 2 weeks later in Beckett.
Frampton and Robert Chadwell. The 33-year-old Vayovis has 2 rows of bumps resembling horns implanted in his forehead, a 666 tattoo between them, and other facial and neck tattoos. After discussing the matter, a Hampton Superior Court judge on Thursday told defense lawyer James Reardon.
Jurors in the Hampton Superior Court trial of Caius Vayovis, accused of the Berkshire triple murder along with Adam Lee Hall and David Chalou, sat sober-faced as autopsy photos were shown. Judge C. Jeffrey Kinder warned the jurors that the photos might be disturbing and urged them to remain impartial. Dr. Hammers gave a detailed account of the injuries suffered by each victim, describing gunshot wounds, stab wounds, knife cuts, and bruises.
A day after a barrage of bullets at this...
In August 2011, just weeks before he was to testify against Hall, Robert Glasser, his roommate Edward Frampton, and their friend Chadwell, he disappeared from Pittsfield. Their dismembered bodies were found in Beckett 10 days later. According to prosecutors, Hall, 36 of Peru, Chalou, 46 of North Adams, and Vayovis, 32 of Pittsfield, kidnapped the victims from Frampton's home in the early hours of August 28, 2011, and shot them.
Guilty to murder, kidnapping, and witness intimidation. His attorney had argued about a month ago that it might be difficult to find impartial jurors in this case due to...
Both Hall and Chalou were found guilty in separate trials of 3 counts of first-degree murder and are serving life sentences without parole. Dr. Hammers detailed the injuries, starting with Chadwell, who had gunshot wounds to his shoulder, torso, and face. He also had 2 stab wounds on his neck, a blunt force injury to his chin causing multiple fractures in his jaw, and rib fractures. Chadwell's injuries included a significant cut from his pubic region to his rib cage, superficial wounds, and cuts on his arm, wrist, and torso. Frampton had 5 gunshot wounds, 1 in his left cheek, 1 in the back of his left shoulder, and 3 in his arms.
execute and cover it all up. Hall has been called the mastermind, the one who needed Glasser dead because he was going to testify against him in a trial for a second.
He also had 3 stab wounds on his jawline, 1 on his neck, and multiple wounds on his torso, including a deep horizontal cut on his upper back that severed his spinal cord, a wound in his lower back, and 1 in his left thigh. Another wound extended from his pelvic area to the base of his ribs. Glasser had 3 gunshot wounds, 1 through his ear into his head, 1 in his left jaw, and 1 in his thigh. He also had 3 stab wounds on his back and a laceration over his eyebrow. His head had 3 hemorrhages, with bleeding under the scalp from blunt injury. His torso was cut apart near the liver, with portions of the liver displaced.
Was this the verdict of the jury, Mr. Foreman?
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, was this your verdict?
Yes.
And was this verdict unanimous?
Yes.
As to count 12, charging the defendant David Chalou with murder of Edward Frampton. You, upon your oath, say the defendant is guilty of murder in the first degree. So say you, Mr. Foreman. Was this the verdict of the jury?
Yes.
So say you all, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Was this your verdict?
Yes.
David Chalou, along with Adam Lee Hall and David Glasser, was accused of kidnapping, murdering, and dismembering 3 men in Berkshire County, Massachusetts in August 2011. The victims were David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell.
In Springfield because of pretrial publicity in the Berkshires. During his closing argument, Chalou's defense attorney argued that the witness testimony against him was not credible because it came from jailhouse informants.
And this is the case against David Chalou. It comes down to 5 inmates with nothing to lose and a lot to gain.
In some parts, the evidence in this case is overwhelming. In other parts, really compelling. But together as a whole, it is convincing.
Charlie, Hall, and Glasser were allegedly hired by a former Hells Angels member named Adam Lee Hall to kill Glasser, who was set to testify against Hall in an unrelated case. Hall wanted to eliminate Glasser as a witness before the trial. Prosecutors argued that Chalou assisted Hall and Glasser in the murders. The 3 men were accused of abducting the victims from Glasser's home, taking them to a secluded area, killing them, and then dismembering their bodies. The Berkshire County District Attorney's Office prosecuted the case. Judith Knight, an assistant district attorney, was the lead prosecutor. Judge C. Jeffrey Kinder of the Berkshire Superior Court presided over the trial. Chalou's trial began in September 2013. The prosecution presented evidence including DNA samples, cell phone records, and witness testimony linking Chalou to the crime scene. The defense argued that Chalou was not present during the murders and that the evidence was circumstantial.
3 additional hours of deliberations. The jury returned to the courtroom and said they want to reconvene tomorrow morning. Chalou was accused of being an accomplice of Adam Lee Hall in the murders of 3 Pittsfield men in 2011. Hall was sentenced to life in prison earlier this year.
After a lengthy trial, the jury found Chalou guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of kidnapping, and 1 count of intimidation of a witness. He was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Hall and Glasser were also convicted for their roles in the murders. Hall received 3 life sentences, while Glasser was sentenced to 17 to 20 years in prison for his cooperation with authorities. That's it for our look at these hardcore bikers facing justice. From clubhouse shootouts to shocking murders, these Hells Angels learned the hard way that crime doesn't pay. Thanks for watching, and ride safe out there.